KTCU FM Fort Worth. You've made it to the end of another long work week. So sit back, relax, and enjoy a few guys talking sports for the next hour. This is Friday Night Sports. Here's Ben Otten, James Flowers, and Mitchell LaFave.
What's up, guys, and welcome to Friday Night Sports. I'm Ben Otten, and alongside me are James Flowers and Mitchell LaFave. We've got a lot of football to talk about with everything from college football last Saturday, including a big win for TCU and Arkansas, and some exciting games of Week 1 in the NFL season. So let's start with some awesome primetime matchups in college football last Saturday, notably the Saturday night primetime game on ABC, number 5 Oklahoma at number 2 Ohio State. It was a big-time early season test for two top 5 teams. But, guys, after seeing the way Ohio State just got steamrolled in the second half from Baker Mayfield and co. and the Oklahoma Sooners, do you still think this Buckeye team is a legitimate playoff contender?
Well, Ohio State was handed their worst home loss since 1999 when they lost to unranked Illinois 46-20 at the Shoe. But really looking at the game, the 31-16 score does not do the game justice. The Buckeyes knew it was going to be a tough task in trying to stop Baker Mayfield, but they couldn't stop him. Are they a legitimate playoff contender? I think so for sure. But I think for them to really have a good shot at the college football playoff as one of the 4 teams, they have to win out. If they lose another game, especially to a Purdue team or Michigan State team or someone who kind of comes out of nowhere, I think their hopes are shot.
Me personally, I don't really think they're a playoff contender. I wasn't really impressed with their performance on Saturday night. JT Barrett didn't throw all that well. They didn't run the ball extremely well, and their secondary wasn't that great either. They don't have the toughest of schedules going forward, besides playing Michigan and Penn State, but I see them losing at least the Nittany Lions down the road. But I do think they will be considered a playoff team for too long by the committee.
Yeah, I like the way you put that, Mitch. It always seems like Ohio State kind of seems to get that upper hand and always the benefit of the doubt. But I'm going to agree with you in another sense, Mitch. JT Barrett, he has looked unimpressive through 2 games. Had a really good second half against Indiana in their season opener. But last Saturday against Oklahoma, 19 of 35, 183 yards, and 1 interception. And for me personally, it's the lack of the downfield threat for JT Barrett. This is something that has caused Coach Urban Meyer a lot of problems, not just this season, but even going back into last season. When this offense struggles, it's because they really don't have anybody down the field. In years past, guys like Devin Smith have been able to take advantage of that, but he doesn't have the talent around him, and especially the wide receiving core, to be able to do that anymore. I would go so far as to say I would consider benching JT Barrett. I know he has the leadership and mental capabilities to be the Ohio State quarterback, and I know this probably will never happen, but Dwayne Haskins is an elite talent. He's a redshirt freshman behind JT Barrett, second string on the depth chart. Should things start to really fall apart, like James mentioned, maybe a loss to Purdue or Iowa or someone like that, I wonder if Coach Meyer goes to the freshman Dwayne Haskins and kind of looks to the future, because you combine him with freshman J.K. Dobbins, the running back, and sophomore running back Mike Weber. That's a really young, explosive backfield that I think the Buckeye fans can look to the future and see some positive in that sense, because they really haven't played well through the first 2 games of this season. On the flip side, guys, let's talk about Baker Mayfield, because I think he deserves to be talked about not just as a legitimate Heisman contender, but possibly as a front runner through 2 games this season.
Well, some of the plays that he made really just reminded me of Johnny Manziel, making something out of nothing and just going with what he was given. Only 8 incompletions in 35 attempts with 3 touchdowns and nearly 400 yards passing. He just shredded the Ohio State defense. And speaking of the Ohio State defense, that's another big issue for Ohio State. No team has given up more than Ohio State's 806 yards, and only 6 teams have surrendered more than Ohio State's 6 touchdowns. There's a lot to worry about really surrounding this Ohio State team, but their defense, normally known to be pretty good, pretty solid, is really struggling this year to really stop these teams. Oklahoma, understandably, with Baker Mayfield, but Indiana, not really a lot of excuses for that.
Yeah, the defense for Ohio State has been pretty poor, especially in the passing game. Against Ohio State, Baker Mayfield was 27 of 35 for 386 yards, and he also threw 3 touchdowns to 3 different guys. Baker Mayfield just seemed to lead the Oklahoma offense into something that Ohio State just couldn't handle.
Yeah, I think for Ohio State, you mentioned that struggling through the passing game. Give a lot of credit to Baker Mayfield and guys around him. Freshman wide receiver CeeDee Lamb had 5 catches for 61 yards. He's becoming a really reliable target for Mayfield. Looks like he has a really bright future in front of him in Norman. But on Ohio State's side, they lost 3 of their 4 starters in the secondary, Garrett Conley and Marshawn Lattimore, and there's one other guy that I can't think of off the top of my head. He also went in an early round, so they're missing those guys a lot and that experience and that talent. But yeah, James, like you said, this Ohio State defense has really carried them the past couple of years. Even when the offense has struggled, it seems like the defense has always, played really well and lived up to their expectations. And now it's kind of both sides of the ball that are falling apart for Coach Urban Meyer's team.
And one thing to add in light of the Oklahoma Sooners, Baker Mayfield really did the majority of his passing game without tight end Mark Andrews, who was his biggest target, not so much last year, but for the first couple of games this year, he was getting a lot of attention from Baker Mayfield, and I don't know how long he's going to be out, but he didn't come into the rest of the game against Ohio State, so that's going to be a big loss. But it seemed like Baker Mayfield did just fine without him.
Yeah, Andrews is the only returning starter from last year's team at a skill position, wide receiver, running backs, and tight end. So it's a completely new offensive group for Baker Mayfield, but he's showing no signs of slowing down despite all the inexperience around him. I think it's been really impressive, not just what we saw Saturday night in Ohio State, but even in their opener against UTEP. He only threw 1 incompletion, had like 300 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's been really good, and we'll see if he can keep it up as Big 12 play opens up for Oklahoma in a couple weeks. Let's move on to another primetime game. This one was on ESPN, a matchup of the Tigers. We talked about it last week on the show, previewed it. Number 13 Auburn came into number 3 Clemson, hoping to get a win, but this Clemson defense was outstanding. They had 11 sacks. They didn't allow Auburn to score a touchdown. They won 14-6. Guys, from what you saw last night, does Clemson have the best defense in the country?
Well, in my opinion, certainly not a commanding win by Clemson. I give a lot of credit to their defense, but their offense did struggle some. 264 offensive yards for Clemson, but it was enough of a gap for the defense, who held Auburn to just 68 yards. Jarrett Stidham had 79 passing yards, and Cameron Petway never really could get going, rushing for just 74 yards on 22 attempts, with his longest run a burst for 15 yards. Even more disappointing was the Tigers' inefficiency in the red zone. But you kind of have to look at Auburn and their situation. So they bring in Jarrett Stidham from Baylor. Their offense is not set up to be run and gun and really high octane. No SEC team's offense really is. So I think you have to look at it in that light, but it's got to be one of the best, if not the best.
Yeah, I'll say it's pretty dang good. They absolutely shut down Auburn last weekend. And I mean, you could say it's tough to judge since, the first week they played Kent State. But I would definitely consider them at least top 5 defense right now. But it'll be a true test this coming weekend against Louisville for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, you guys sound like you're pretty on the fence. Maybe Alabama's in that conversation for the best defense in the country, and Clemson a little bit farther behind. I'm not so sure about that. I think they're kind of neck and neck for that top spot in terms of defensive talent from what we've seen in the first 2 games of the season. But yeah, like Mitch said, Lamar Jackson, the reigning Heisman winner, Clemson goes to visit Louisville this weekend, and so we'll really see just how good this Clemson defense is. As for on the offensive side of things, Clemson, like James said, the offense did not play that well. Surprisingly, Kelly Bryant kind of carried the offense as a junior, only making his second career start. He was 19-29 for 181 yards through the air and had 2 rushing touchdowns, but he didn't have any help. No Clemson running back had more than 17 yards, and only 2 receivers had more than 2 catches. That's a bit eye-opening, because if there was a question mark in this Clemson offense coming into the season, it certainly was the quarterback position, because Kelly Bryant obviously hadn't played all that much with him sitting behind Deshaun Watson for 2 years. but the guys around him, Hunter Renfrow, Deion Kane, Raymond McLeod, Tavian Feaster, these guys have all had experience in big situations and big games last year. We thought the problem would be Kelly Bryant. It hasn't been. I'm sure that's a bit of a problem that is causing Dabo Swinney some late nights as he looks to as he looks to repeat as national champions. Obviously, a long way to go until then, and a lot of time to figure it out. Only time will tell. Another top 25 matchup on Saturday night in South Bend on Saturday. Georgia came into Notre Dame. They beat the Irish 20-19, but it was an ugly game. Georgia lost starting quarterback Jacob Eason last week against Appalachian State to injury, or should I say 2 weeks ago now in the season opener. He's likely out for another 2 to 3 games. But, guys, based on what you saw from the freshman backup quarterback Jake Fromm, how badly does Georgia miss Jacob Eason?
Well, you kind of alluded to it, but the biggest question mark heading into the last weekend for Georgia was Jake Fromm, and could he deliver against a ranked opponent? The answer we know now is yes, and that's what he did. It was certainly not his best game and won't be the best game of the freshman's young career, but he managed the game just enough to get the job done on the road in a hostile environment like South Bend. Again, kind of like I said last week, hate to use the term game manager, but that's what he had to do. He had to limit the mistakes, not force things, let the Georgia offense run its course, more of a running offense now that Jacob Eason is gone. And that's what he did. And it was a close game, not an offensive shootout by any means, but he did enough to get it done.
I would say, yeah, obviously they miss a top quarterback like Eason, but I wouldn't say they miss him that badly. I mean, they still have 2 great running backs in Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel. They beat Notre Dame this past weekend. I'll admit I believe the Irish are a bit overrated, but Fromm still led the Bulldogs to beat a top 25 team on the road. I don't think it'll be a problem this week against Samford, but going forward, they play Mississippi State the following week. If they're without him, that's definitely going to be a tough test. But if Jacob Eason's back, Georgia will be just fine.
Yeah, I think Georgia's really going to struggle from here on out, especially once they get into SEC play. Not a huge offensive game like it could have been. Really a bit of a sloppy game, to be perfectly honest. Sonny Michel and Nick Chubb combined for over 136 yards rushing. That's it between the two. And Jake Fromm passed for 141 yards, not eye-popping, but the most staggering statistic in this game for me was the number of field goals attempted, which was 7. 6 field goals were made by both teams combined as Justin Yoon went 4 for 4 and was Notre Dame's leading scorer on the night. So that alone kind of tells you what kind of game this was.
Yeah, for me personally, Jake Fromm, like James said, it's kind of hard to argue with the performance. Yeah, sure, he didn't play all that well, didn't light up the scoreboard, but he went into a hostile environment against a top 25 team in Notre Dame and left with a win in his first collegiate start. I don't think you can ask much more for that if you're head coach Kirby Smart. And Georgia improves to 3-0 in the season, while Notre Dame falls to 2-1. Moving on, not exactly a big fan of the scheduling in week 2 because it was another late night game, and this one was out on the West Coast. An interesting Pac-12 game nonetheless between Stanford and USC. Guys, USC quarterback Sam Darnold bounced back from a rather poor performance last week against Western Michigan. He threw for 316 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Cardinal. Is he back in the Heisman race?
Well, he started off 11 for 11, 141 yards, finished 21 of 26, 316 yards and 4 touchdowns. Can't really argue with that. He's got some help in the run game. Stephen Carr and Ronald Jones combined for over 200 yards rushing. The Trojans really controlled the line of scrimmage all night, making holes for the run game while protecting Darnold for the passing game. Huge win for USC and show the nation that they are for real this year. I think he definitely is in the Heisman race, especially if he keeps these numbers up. He's not running around the field like Lamar Jackson, but he's that pocket quarterback. He has a lot of poise in the pocket and will wait for something if it's not there, or will make something happen. I think for sure he's in the Heisman race.
Yeah, I really think he's Sam Darnold's up in that Heisman race as well. He had such a great performance against a top Power 5 school in Stanford, and I think he's got top quarterback stuff. He did throw 2 picks against Stanford, but he was still 21 of 26 for over 300 yards and threw for 4 touchdowns as well. I mentioned, it would be tough to see how he is under a bit more pressure in a physical school from Stanford, physical defense in Stanford. And like James said, showed a lot of poise in the pocket.
Yeah, Mitch, you alluded to those 2 interceptions. He also threw 2 against Western Michigan. That's not as big of an issue for guys. 4 interceptions through 2 games isn't exactly great.
No, it's not. But if you think about it, finishes 21 for 26, throws 2 picks, so really he only has 3 incompletions. I mean, yeah, everyone's going to throw interceptions. Look at Kenny Hill last year, but you never want to be the leader in throwing picks. But I think when you throw so much, which he is, that's going to happen, and I think that can be overlooked, to be perfectly honest with you. Especially, like, Lamar Jackson is that type of player that passes a lot, runs a lot, and, yeah, doesn't get as many picks. But Sam Darnold is kind of just that he's only got one threat, and that's really with his arm. So you kind of consider that in a couple of different ways.
Yeah, also, still a young guy. He's only a redshirt sophomore, so he'll still make some mistakes, try to force the ball down the field. We saw that a couple times, but probably being a little overcritical of Sam Darnold. That offense, though, it has balance. James mentioned Ronald Jones and Stephen Carr. They combined for 235 yards on the ground. This defense looks really good. And, it seems the USC Trojans are finally back. We'll go from Sam Darnold, a Heisman candidate, to the reigning Heisman winner in Lamar Jackson. He and that Louisville offense looked frightening, guys, in a rout on the road at UNC. I know it's going to be hard for Lamar Jackson to repeat as Heisman winner with all the contenders and all the guys around him that he's going to have to beat out. But, guys, can he do it?
Well, he completely owned the UNC defense. Tar Heels linebacker Andre Smith said the Thursday before the game that they would stop Lamar Jackson. He said that he didn't want it to be the Lamar Jackson show, but that's exactly what it turned out to be. I mean, Lamar Jackson accounted for 575 yards of total offense as the Cardinals totaled 705. Missed a couple of wide-open receivers towards the sidelines, but hit receivers with the long ball a few different times and just fully in command all game. I mean, if he's keeping up these numbers, he's going to be tough to beat.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Lamar Jackson is a force on offense, but like you mentioned, Ben, he's got some good competition this year. There's Saquon Barkley, beast of a running back for Penn State. Sam Darnold, he's shown he can keep up with solid defenses. And even though, I hate to say it, Baker Mayfield, he'll also be up in that race again, too. But I think tomorrow's game against Clemson will really prove if Lamar Jackson can win it back-to-back years.
Yeah, I'm a big-time Lamar Jackson fan, and for me, it just blows me away how easy he makes everything look on the football field. It's like for him, it seems like every week is just kind of like a pickup game, just going through the motions. The way he just kind of throws the ball down the field, puts it right on the money every single throw. His ability to create with his legs, it's just an absolute. He's just an absolute monster on offense. So difficult to stop, and he's made such big leaps year to year. If you guys remember his freshman year, he really relied on his legs and his speed to kind of get him out of trouble, and he used that more than his arm. His sophomore year, he started to trust his arm a little bit more and used his legs just to create for his arm, which made this Louisville offense explosive. And now this season, I mean, he makes all the throws. He throws check down routes, throws the ball away when he needs to. He just seems to get better and better every year. And for me personally, I'm a UNC fan, so it was frustrating watching this game. But I don't know if you guys have like a mom or a sister or maybe like a cousin or something. But like whenever they're watching football and someone on the other team is running, they're always yelling like, "Get him, get him!" That's what it feels like if you're playing Lamar Jackson as a defense. He's just so difficult to contain, and he showed that against UNC. And we'll see, because he's going to get tested this Saturday against Clemson, a team that beat him last year, and a defense that looks really good thus far. So let's move on to an interesting in-state rivalry between Iowa and Iowa State. Guys, Iowa State collapsed in the fourth quarter in overtime. They're now 5-10 in their last 15 meetings between these two teams. Given the expectations for Iowa State this season, they're not very high. So how devastating of a loss was this for the Cyclones?
I mean, obviously, it sucks to lose against your rival, your in-state rival, at home, and after giving up the tying score with just a minute to go, just to lose it in overtime. I mean, it won't change the course of the season for Iowa State. I mean, they're most likely going to sit in the bottom half of the Big 12. I would say it's more of a very disappointing loss for them, but not devastating.
My big question is, who was working harder in the fourth quarter, the Iowa State defense or the police in Ames? Because 32 people were arrested at the game, 24 for public intoxication charges. So the Iowa State police was on their game in the fourth quarter, unlike this Iowa State defense. But in the game, for sure, a fun game to watch if you like offense. When TCU plays in Ames, I don't think this will be a gimme game for the Frogs by any means. Jacob Park looked really comfortable throwing the ball, threw for 347 yards. David Montgomery tallied 112 yards on the ground. And Hakeem Butler had a long 74-yard reception and ended the day well, over 100 receiving yards. So the Cyclones team is on the rise, and they've got some offense to show for it. But can their defense hold up? They clearly really couldn't in the fourth quarter against Iowa, so that's going to be a big point for these teams to just keep wearing them down and wait to the fourth quarter.
And on the flip side, for Iowa, it seems like when this team is at their best, like when every now and then they seem to have a really good team, they always fly under the radar for a little bit, and they're in the Big Ten. They're not Ohio State, Michigan State, or Penn State, so no one really talks about them. They keep winning, and then finally they get some publicity and they fall apart. And this Iowa team is being overlooked again. I mean, quarterback Nathan Stanley had 5 touchdown passes last week, and the running back duo of Akrum Wadley and James Butler is really good. So I guess only time will tell again. Don't overlook this Iowa team, though. They do host Penn State in 2 weeks, so, I think we'll figure out how good they are. And if this Iowa team is finally for real, because Kirk Ferentz, it seems to be the model of consistency in college football in going about 7-5 and maybe winning a bowl game every now and then, but he's never really had a national championship contender. I'm not so sure he has that now, but certainly a team to keep an eye on in the Big Ten Conference.
Well, they really weren't favored last year when they played Michigan, and when they knocked them off, that was a pretty big shock. So maybe look for that again this year. I don't really consider Iowa to be. I mean, I don't really consider Michigan to be at the top of the Big Ten, but they're always in. They're always in a top game for sure. They're always competitive.
And then for the last game, guys, if you stayed up late, if you happen to stay up late after the Oklahoma-Ohio State game, most of us just kind of are usually done with college football after that primetime game on ABC. But if you did this week, you arguably missed the best game of the day, because number 20 Washington State rallied from down 21 to beat Boise State 47-44 in triple overtime. James, I know you personally were tuned into this one closely. What happened to the Broncos down the stretch?
Very disappointing loss for Boise State, and no real excuse for it. You kind of mentioned it. The Broncos had a streak of over 100 straight wins when leading by 21 or more points in a game, and that streak ended on Saturday night. Brett Ripien left the game early after taking a blindside shot to the ribs. I think that was part of it. Kansas grad transfer Marcel Cozart replaced him, and frankly, the Broncos offense is not the same without Ripien. But on the flip side, for Washington State, Tyler Hilinski replaced Luke Falk and actually played very well. Got a couple of garbage time touchdowns, but they soon turned into game-tying touchdowns as Boise State struggled down the stretch. Neither Luke Falk or Brett Ripien have had incredible games this season, so I'll be really curious to see how both teams deal with the quarterback situation going forward. Hilinski played well for Washington State. Cozart did not play great for Boise State. He actually started last night against New Mexico, which Boise State rebounded, got the win at home. So each team is in a bit of a different spot, but there are question marks around the position for both teams.
Yeah, I was going to get to that quarterback situation for Washington State. I mean, you mentioned Luke Falk. He's a senior. He's got over 11,000 passing yards and 92 touchdowns in his career. He's projected to be, a third or fourth round pick in this upcoming NFL draft. And he actually got benched for a series in the second half for sophomore Tyler Hilinski. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
And I think part of the reason why he got benched was, you're right. He did get benched for a series, and then he didn't play the rest of the game in the second half because I think he got a concussion or he hurt his head pretty badly. But, for Washington State, they're not a college football playoff contender. It's as much as Mike Leake wants to believe that. or Mike Leach, sorry. There really aren't. But I think if it really gets down to it, give Helinski the shot. Might as well. If it takes Luke Falk a week or two to get his head right and turn the game up, then give it over to Helinski and see what he can do.
I think Mike Leach confirmed Luke Falk will start this week against Oregon State, but that's still an interesting quarterback battle to keep an eye on as the season continues. We're going to take a quick break. There's one game we haven't recapped yet. That's the Horned Frogs. They got a big win in Arkansas, got a little revenge in Fayetteville last weekend. We'll discuss that right after this.
Red 78, watch 32, watch 32. Roll!
You wouldn't text while playing football.
Red, blue.
You wouldn't text while cheerleading. So why in the world do you think you can text while driving?
Have you heard the buzz about West Nile virus? Protect yourself and your family from the mosquito bites that spread the virus. When you go outside, use mosquito repellent containing DEET. When possible, wear long-sleeve shirts and pants. And remove standing water around your home where mosquitoes breed. Anyone can become infected, but if you're over 50, you're at higher risk for severe disease or even death from West Nile virus. Remember, the best defense comes from things you can do yourself. Fight the bite. Tell mosquitoes to buzz off.
Welcome back to Friday Night Sports. TCU Arkansas, big game last weekend for the Horned Frogs. They got a 28-7 win in Fayetteville to avenge last season's double overtime loss here in Fort Worth. Guys, for me personally, I was very unimpressed with Arkansas on both sides of the ball. Maybe you would see it the other way and giving TCU that TCU defense a lot of credit.
Well, I think offensively TCU beat Arkansas with their own game plan. Coach Patterson said after the game that they were very happy to hold the ball as long as they needed in order to put points on the board. This was clearly a situation of taking the run game and using that against the 3-4 defense that Arkansas presented. The 3-4, depending how effective it is, can protect against the rush, but in this case, Arkansas was preparing for an up-tempo TCU offense, and they never really saw that on Saturday, and as a result, got hurt by the TCU run game.
Yeah, like you said, the TCU run game. I mean, TCU's got three potent running backs in Kyle Hicks, Darius Anderson, and Sewell Onalua. They scored quite a bit. Just a lot of Anderson had 106 yards, had a 14-yard score. Sewell ran for 13 yards in the Wildcat formation to put us up 28-7. I think TCU offense, especially the running game, really just put Arkansas on their heels.
Yeah, I was really impressed with offense coordinator Sonny Cumbie. I mean, he's kind of a passing guy, loves to air it out and let his quarterback really light up the scoreboard. But it was the running game that was working last Saturday, and so he stuck to the running game. He rode guys like Darius Anderson, Alana Liu, who had 2 touchdowns on 2 carries, and Kyle Hicks, who was in his first game back. And I was surprised by that and really impressed because it showed, not only, I think Sonny Cumbie believes in Kenny Hill and thinks he's really set for a big year, but he saw what was working on Saturday and stayed with it. The issue with that is when they called passing plays, it was a lot of short, simple dump-off routes for Kenny Hill to make really easy reads off that. Like I said, the running game was working, and the TCU defense played really well, so you didn't want to give Arkansas a short field. But it's almost like Sonny Cumbie really didn't trust Kenny Hill and didn't want him to make a mistake. And when you have a redshirt senior quarterback, I don't think it's a terrible approach because it obviously worked. But I don't know that his defense can continue to play as well as they did last week. And if they don't, this offense is going to have to go, and Kenny Hill's going to have to start getting it going as well.
Well, I think for this game specifically, Kenny Hill was not asked to do too much, and overall he really didn't force much. He had one bad throw, which was intercepted. Once again, throwing to 5'9", Cavante Turpin, who was locked down in double coverage. Don't really understand what he's seeing there, but Coach Gary Patterson said the week leading up to the Arkansas game that Kenny Hill just needed to manage the game, and that's what he did. And that's not an attempt to say that Hill is a game manager type quarterback, but more so just don't force anything, don't make a lot of mistakes, because they really weren't sure where this Arkansas offense was going to go. It really could have hurt him on the ground or could have hurt him in the air like last year which is what Austin Allen did. So, kind of preparing for best and worst case scenario.
Yeah, I mean, Kenny Hill, he didn't do great, but he didn't do terrible. I mean, he completed 21 of 31 passes, yes, for only 166 yards. He didn't get sacked at all. Props to the offensive line there, but he also did well at escaping pressure when he was. He threw that one interception, which definitely wasn't a good throw. And he also converted 3 first downs on the ground himself. He could have had a passing touchdown. Sometimes the receivers got to use 2 hands to catch the ball. But I think, overall, it is a pretty decent performance for Kenny Hill. I guess get his confidence up that he can make some passes coming into these big games coming up.
And let's talk about the Arkansas quarterback while we're talking about quarterbacks. Guys, Austin Allen, he didn't get much help, but didn't play well at all. Was 9 of 23. Yes, 9 for 23 for 138 yards and a touchdown. The running game was not nearly as explosive as they were in Arkansas' season opener against Florida A&M. I was really impressed, though, with TCU's corners and just the secondary in general. Their man coverage against these Arkansas wide receivers was locked down, and I was very surprised by that. And it certainly looks like a good sign going forward.
Yeah, you alluded to it. That Austin Allen was flustered all afternoon, for me, up to a point where I actually felt bad for him. But end of the day, with more incompletions than completions, which you definitely don't really want to hear. And the TCU defense, they held the Hogs to 129 yards rushing, which was their main game plan. So they checked the box there. Very strong defensive game, which I think they needed, especially against an SEC foe. The 2 missed chip shot field goals gave the defense a big boost, but a little ironic how the tables were turned this year, as last year it was TCU who struggled on the kicking game, but this year it was Arkansas.
Yeah, and you mentioned Austin Allen. It was 9 for 23. You said, yes. Is that right? I think some of that comes from feeling pressure. I think our defensive line did a good job at getting past the offensive line, putting Austin Allen pressure, getting him to throw in situations he didn't want to, or forcing him to take the sack. So far this season, TCU, they've got 8 sacks. Their defense has 8 sacks. And again, limiting scoring. TCU right now, number 1 in the nation in red zone defense.
Yeah, that's definitely a good sign, especially for an offense that scored, 13 touchdowns in 2 games and no field goals. So the red zone efficiency on both sides of the ball has been really good for TCU. All in all, for me, just kind of what you expected from TCU and what you should expect going forward. They didn't blow Arkansas out, didn't light up the scoreboard, but they looked a lot like an experienced team that's got a lot of upperclassmen and a veteran group, and they just won. They just simply won, and I think that's something really big to take away from this game. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we'll talk some more football. We'll move to Sundays in the NFL, as the NFL got started with Week 1 last week. Some big games to talk about right after this.
I go to school with your children. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together. I'm one out of every 4 children in America, and I'm struggling with hunger. I'm lucky to grow up where I could be whatever I want. I want to grow up and be someone who doesn't go to bed hungry. Please visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank. Every dollar you donate helps provide 7 meals for kids like me. Together, we're Feeding America. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Multiple sclerosis destroys connection, so it's only fitting that connection would be its greatest enemy, because connection takes away MS's ability to isolate, and as more connections form, we end up with more knowledge, more resources, more understanding, more ideas, and more hope. And then, the connections we make become more powerful than the connections MS destroys. MS kills connection. Connection kills MS. Give what you know at msconnection.org.
Welcome back to Friday Night Sports. I'm Ben Otten, and alongside me, James Flowers and Mitchell LaFave. The NFL Week 1 started last Sunday, or I guess last weekend. And, guys, let's just start with the hometown team. The Dallas Cowboys took on the New York Giants one-handedly by a score of 19-3. For me, personally, the Giants just missed Odell Beckham Jr. badly, but the game went about as expected for Cowboys fans.
Yeah, from what I saw, Zeke set the tempo of the game. He's just so dominant on the ground, and he really helps open up the passing game for Dak Prescott. And as for the Giants, like you said, they just seemed lost without Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, they've got some good assets, especially with the addition of Brandon Marshall, but they just didn't seem like they could get anything going without him.
Yeah, I think a lot of people anticipated the Giants would be able to do a lot more than what they actually did against the Cowboys. Odell can't do everything for the Giants offense, and in the coming weeks, they're going to have to figure out how to get Brandon Marshall more involved. Sterling Shepard is underrated but can be explosive, and rookie Evan Ingram, although listed as a tight end, will be more of an offensive weapon for Eli Manning this season. So really, we don't know how long Odell is going to miss. I've heard up to 6 to 8 weeks, and we just don't know. So they've got to figure something out if they want to be in contention for this NFC East.
Yeah, and going off that, for me, it's not so much Eli Manning and the targets he has around him, because he certainly has enough weapons around him. This Giants team did not and has not in recent years had any balance on the offensive side of the ball. They had no running game again last night. Paul Perkins has kind of taken over as the lead back for New York, but he really couldn't get going last night against a pretty subpar front seven for Dallas. I thought he'd have a better game, and when the Giants can run the ball, Eli Manning and guys like Odell Beckham, Brandon Marshall, Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram, those guys become much more explosive. And I think if the Giants were able to get a running game going, this game would have been a lot closer than it actually was.
Yeah, Eli Manning tends to take a lot of blame for the Giants' success or how unsuccessful they are. But you kind of said it. It really wasn't his fault. I mean, he's dealing with what he's got on his team is pretty good, especially with weapons. So it's not his fault by any means. They've got to figure it out on offense because Odell just cannot do everything. And when he's back, yeah, that's great. But they've got to figure something out.
Let's move on to the game of the week from Week 1, a defensive battle for sure at Lambeau Field between Seattle and Green Bay. Once again, this Seahawks offensive line just could not protect Russell Wilson. The rushing game was very average, and Green Bay pulled away in the second half for a pretty easy victory.
Yeah, I mean, neither team really looked stellar on offense. I mean, scoring was troublesome for both. Seattle didn't get a touchdown at all. Their offensive line was not good. Russell Wilson was sacked or hurried a whole bunch of times. But then, on the defensive side, you got the Jeremy Lane ejection, which was very controversial since, Devontae Adams clearly started that fight. But that was just a case of, the ref saw the retaliation and punished Lane for it.
In my preview for this game, I said that if the offensive line could protect Russell Wilson, the Seahawks could end their 8-game losing streak at Lambeau Field. The defense played very well for Seattle, holding the Packers and Aaron Rodgers scoreless in the first half at Lambeau Field for just the second time in Rodgers' career. I thought losing Jeremy Lane the first half from an ejection call would hurt the Seahawks, but didn't really seem to affect them as rookie Shaquille Griffin recorded 10 tackles in his first game, second most behind Earl Thomas. The Packers stuffed the run game by not allowing Eddie Lacy to break loose, but overall, no offensive breakout from Seattle at all. Russell Wilson just didn't have a lot of time in the pocket, and his receivers couldn't get open. So, Ben, when we talked about our Super Bowl predictions, I mentioned, nobody brought up the Packers, and you mentioned that their defense wasn't that great. They looked pretty good this weekend.
Yeah, I agree. This Green Bay defense, I didn't really know much about them going into this season, but in years past, that's kind of what's always held them back. And, we saw that in the NFC Championship game last year. Atlanta's offense, in fairness, in that game was outstanding, but Green Bay just couldn't keep up with the scoring. And if Aaron Rodgers has to do that every single week in and week out, I don't know if he's capable of it, especially in a postseason environment. But yeah, if this defense keeps playing like they did in Week 1, I definitely think Green Bay's got to be in the Super Bowl consideration. On the flip side, this Seattle defense, James, you mentioned, if you take out that 32-yard touchdown pass from Aaron Rodgers to Jordy Nelson, and just that drive in general, they kind of let off the gas pedal for one drive. But other than that, they were on the field a lot and were just pretty much lights out against probably, I would say, one of the best offenses in the NFC. I was really impressed with them. If the offense can kind of find some rhythm and a really a dominant running game like they've had in previous years, Seattle's another team to keep your eye on in the NFC.
Yeah, you said it. It's just obviously very frustrating for Russell Wilson in the offense when you've got the weapons around you, but again, just cannot pull it off with that offensive line. The offensive line creates the passing game. It creates holes for the running game. And as much of kind of a bowling ball Eddie Lacy is, he usually chunks for 4 or 5 yards. He couldn't even get that. So really just frustrating to watch if you're a Seattle fan.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move from a defensive-minded game in Green Bay to a really fun offensive showing between Arizona and Detroit. But, guys, I think it's pretty clear the biggest takeaway from this game is David Johnson's wrist injury. He's going to be out for probably up to 2 months because I think that just hurts him badly because, I mean, the Cardinals' passing game with Carson Palmer did not look good at all. Their receiving core just isn't that good. How badly is Arizona going to miss David Johnson for the stretch?
I think they're definitely going to miss David Johnson. Yeah, Carson Palmer was just straight up not good in the game against Detroit. And with David Johnson out for the next couple of months, it's going to be up to Carson Palmer is going to have to step up as well. But you got a couple new running backs that are going to split work, and they got to step up as well.
Yeah, and looking at where they turn as they prepare to go a lengthy time without David Johnson. They look at Chris Johnson. Looks like they're going to sign him. He's 31, but was cut following the preseason because he fumbled a lot, but is re-signing because Arizona just needs somebody at the position. And he's capable of getting 100 yards a game, but he's got to stay healthy, which is the biggest question mark for the Cardinals' run game heading into Week 2. You look at Kerwin Williams. He's 5'8", 198 pounds, but he's all about speed. Had 111 of his 157 rushing yards last season outside of both tackles. Really fast, but he's never started a game. So depending on what happens with Johnson, he could find himself in the starting role. And then the third option, probably the last option, is Andre Ellington, who hasn't played since 2015, has a bunch of injury issues. Option in the passing game, but really not a rushing back. So this is a huge hit to them losing David Johnson.
Yeah, I haven't seen much of Kerwin Williams, but from what you said about his stature and his build and the way he runs, it doesn't really sound like he fits the NFL bill of a running back. I mean, maybe you've seen a little bit more on him, James. You can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I haven't seen a whole lot of him either, but it's really, if you can break loose in a run game, then yes, speed can help you. But it's kind of like how Maurice Jones-Drew was in the back of the day. Which I don't even remember him playing because I was so young. But really, kind of like I said, he was like a bowling ball type of guy. Like you gotta chunk for those 5-6 yards consistently, and Kerwin Williams just doesn't really seem like that type of guy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see this weekend and the couple weeks ahead. Obviously, I mean, he won't be called on to do all the work. Like you said, they signed Chris Johnson, and maybe even Andre Ellington could get some rushing yards, and they'll definitely rely more on the passing game now, I think, going forward. On the flip side, though, this Detroit offense with Matthew Stafford, I mean, he didn't start very well, and everyone started kind of making jokes. He's the highest paid player in the NFL history and had, 7 points at halftime, but this Arizona defense is really good, and he turned around. He looked really good in the second half, guys.
Yeah, he definitely did. It definitely didn't look too great for Matthew Stafford, especially when he threw a pick six on their first drive of the game. But he settled down afterwards. Didn't have a brilliant game, but he threw for just short of 300 yards, threw four touchdown passes, and it's something you hope that you can start seeing out of a guy that you're paying $135 million over the next 5 years.
Yeah, that's a pretty big chunk of change. I think Detroit's kind of relying on Matthew Stafford in that passing game. The defense is also they've made a lot of improvements over the past couple of years. We'll see if they can challenge Green Bay for that NFC East title. And finally, guys, a bit of a surprising game to make the list that we're going to talk about, but Pittsburgh-Cleveland was a lot closer than a lot of people expected. Were you more impressed with Cleveland, or is this a warning sign for the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I think it's a bit of a sign of both. It's just game one of the season. The Steelers pretty much own that division. But we'll see. It's, as I said, it's only week 1. But for the Browns, I think they've got a lot of upside. DeShone Kizer had a very solid first game for Cleveland, and I think for the first time in a long time, there aren't many questions swirling around the quarterback job for the Browns now. It's Kizer's. He completed 2/3 of his passes, threw for over 200 yards with a touchdown and interception. Majority of sacks given up by the Browns were coverage sacks, which was not on Kizer. It just meant that the Pittsburgh secondary is playing well and not allowing receivers to break free. So something really, really bright for the Browns to look at. I think the Browns are in very good hands with DeShone Kizer right now.
Yeah, I think it was a great performance by the Cleveland Browns considering their season last year. DeShone Kizer did better than you'd probably expect from a rookie quarterback, especially for the Browns. He went 20 of 30 for 222 yards, had a passing touchdown and a rushing touchdown. On the defensive side, the Steelers they only gave the ball to Le'Veon Bell 10 times, but they did only hold him to 32 yards when he rushed. But their secondary struggled a bit. Antonio Brown caught 11 passes for 182 yards. It was close to 70% of Ben Roethlisberger's yards in the air. But that's something that they're going to want to definitely work on.
Yeah. I'll build on that, Mitch. I think Le'Veon Bell, they showed him, they gave him a lot of carries early on and showed a lot of confidence in him, and then it kind of just went all downhill. He didn't start well, and after that, they just started throwing the ball all over the place. Roethlisberger threw the ball 36 times, and when you have one of the best running backs in the NFL and a pretty old Ben Roethlisberger, and outside of Antonio Brown, not a lot of targets for him to throw to, I just think Pittsburgh needs to find more balance on offense and kind of ride Le'Veon Bell, which they really didn't do, and that kind of let Cleveland stay in the game.
An interesting storyline that is somewhat developing is about Josh Gordon. He could be back in a Browns uniform soon, believe it or not, if he's reinstated by the NFL. Gordon has not played a game since December 2014. According to Cleveland.com, this is believed to be the 4th time Gordon has entered rehab. According to his trainer, former Olympian Tim Montgomery, Gordon has stayed clean the last 3 months, but adds that he sometimes gets in the way of his own success. This will be an interesting storyline to follow if Gordon can once again forge a path to the NFL and actually keep it this time. I'll be really interested to see if I texted one of my friends about Josh Gordon. He's a Browns fan. There aren't many of those that are public about it. But he said he thinks the Browns are done with Josh Gordon. Could a team like Jacksonville pick him up and probably use him? Maybe. But do they want to deal with the Josh Gordon that comes with that, all the baggage? Probably not.
Yeah, and outside of everything off the field, this is a guy that hasn't played, what, you said 3 years?
Yeah.
So, is he in football shape? Is he ready to go right now, or is it going to take him a couple weeks to get back? I know you just said he's entering rehab now, so, is he ready to go and ready to start for an NFL team? Because I think we've seen when Josh Gordon's at his best and is ready to play and has trained and prepared well, he can be a great receiver in this league. He showed that at times early on in his career, so I don't think he's a guy to overlook, but you gotta find out where his head at, and if it's really in his heart and he really wants to be there and wants to be an NFL wide receiver. If he can, it definitely helps DeShone Kizer.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the Martavis Bryant situation in Pittsburgh. Bryant really didn't have a great game, didn't get many targets in Cleveland. But a similar situation in which if Josh Gordon could come back and be a contributor to the team and not be a distraction, it's just another target, like you said, for DeShone Kizer.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for our NFL Week 1 recap. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll preview TCU's game this weekend as SMU comes to town, a battle for the Iron Skillet. We do all that right after this.
5 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's disease, and another 16 million husbands, wives, children, and friends are caregivers. But the right foods may help you prevent it. Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, the same foods that fight diabetes and heart disease can also keep your brain strong and memory sharp. Let's eat right to fight Alzheimer's. Visit eattofightalzheimers.org.
Are you or a loved one unable to lead a healthy lifestyle because your physical ailments prohibit you from making nutritious meals for yourself? Do you find that you eat out for every meal because it's too difficult to cook? Well, get excited, because you can kiss fast food goodbye. Meals on Wheels delivers nutritionally balanced meals to the elderly and disabled citizens of Tarrant County. Wait, it gets even better. Each meal is made with love because each client gets their own professional case manager who prepares meals and recipes that specifically meet each client's personal health needs. You're probably thinking to yourself, this sounds great, but what's the catch? I'm here to tell you that there is no catch. Eligibility for these meal services are based on need. Help and health are just a few clicks away. For more information, call 817-336-0912. From there, a case manager will set up a time for a home visit and assessment. You're on your way to healthy living. For Meals on Wheels, call 817-336-0912.
Welcome back to Friday Night Sports, guys. Let's preview TCU's upcoming football game this weekend. Saturday afternoon, SMU comes to town, the Battle of the Iron Skillet. Both teams are 2-0, but they've gotten there in very different ways. Last season, the Horned Frogs won 33-3 at SMU. The TCU will be looking to make it 6 in a row over the Mustangs.
Yeah, Battle of the Iron Skillet is always a fun one, and this year does not appear to be any different. For SMU, this is one of, if not the biggest game of their season. A win over an undefeated Big 12 team would make a lot of noise and could get some consideration for the AP poll. As for TCU, it would round out their non-conference schedule with a solid win and would give the Horned Frogs something positive to look at already this season as they prepare for Oklahoma State in 2 weeks.
Yeah, SMU, their offense has been doing pretty well, you could say, these first couple weeks. They're averaging 56 points a game. Their first win was over FCS Stephen F. Austin. Second game came against North Texas. So their most points in the first two games in their school history. But again, at the same time, while it's still early to tell, TCU's defense is off to a great start. They've allowed 3.5 points per game. Again, very beginning of the season. But it's going to be interesting to see how the passing attack with SMU and Cortland Sutton is going to fare against TCU's defense.
You beat me right to it, Mitch. This is a fun matchup, especially when SMU has the ball. We talked about Arkansas. Last week and how well that TCU secondary played in that game, and they're going to have their hands full this weekend because Cortland Sutton's a preseason second team All-American, and coming off an unreal game last week against North Texas. He got 8 passes for 163 yards and 4 touchdowns, was named American Athletic Conference Player of the Week. This guy is unreal and a real threat for this Mustang offense.
Yeah, he actually set an American Conference record last week for receiving touchdowns in a game with 4 against North Texas. He's projected to go mid-first round in the NFL draft, and he actually terrorized the Frogs secondary last year, which, to be fair, wasn't the best. He scored just 1 touchdown, but had 115 receiving yards on just 4 catches. I mean, this guy is ridiculous, and he's doing it all for SMU. So not a gimme game by any means, but should be a fun one to watch. Historically, the last few matchups between SMU and TCU in Fort Worth have been much too close for comfort for fans of the Horned Frogs. 2013, SMU actually led TCU 10-7 heading to the locker room. TCU won 48-17. 2015, SMU made it a 6-point game with 8 minutes to play in the fourth quarter, but TCU held on to win 56-37. And in 2011, if anybody needs a reminder, was the last time SMU beat TCU, which was in Fort Worth. So a history of close games here in Fort Worth, but I think it'll be another close one. But I think TCU's going to get it done on Saturday night.
And it'll also have to do, like always, with how Kenny Hill can improve his game. Did pretty well managing the game last week. But, hopefully he doesn't revert back to his Kenny Trill from last year, because SMU had 18 interceptions last season. It was tied for 9th in the FBS. So Kenny Hill's got to keep the ball out of their hands for sure.
Yeah, you guys covered my keys pretty quickly. I think someone else other than Cortland Sutton's got to beat you if you're TCU's defense. And then, like Mitch just said, I mean, Kenny Hill's got to get going. This SMU team, they really pride themselves on takeaways and forcing turnovers. They'll be certainly looking to do that against Kenny Hill, who has thrown 2 interceptions through 2 games and through, 15 a year ago. So that's something to keep your eye on. But I think TCU, if they can hold on to the ball and move the ball the way they did at times against Arkansas and certainly against Jackson State, and this defense looks really good, I think they do enough. Cortland Sutton might get his, but outside of that, I think TCU will cruise. I got 48-28 Frogs. What about you guys?
For me, I think I had TCU 38, SMU 17. That was for me.
I'll go 35-14. Being a little generous on the SMU defense.
All right. Well, stay right here and move on to the Week 3 Pick'em. Guys, quick update on the standings. Me and Mitch are atop the leaderboards with a 6-4 record. James, you're in last with 5-5, looking to pick it up and catch up with me.
Loser.
With me and Mitch.
Last out of 3 people. Woo.
All right. So let's start with Tennessee and Florida. I mean, Florida last week had their game against Northern Colorado canceled, so they kind of had an extra bye week to prepare for Tennessee. Does that pay off for the Gators?
Well, this game really hinges on the hangover effect for Florida. Will the Gators be able to forget the horrific loss to Michigan, or will it haunt them in their second game of the season? Florida has a bigger quarterback problem than I think they anticipated, with Felipe Franks and Malik Zaire both struggling against Michigan, while Quentin Dormady looked confident for the Volunteers in the double overtime win against Georgia Tech in Week 1. Too many questions revolve around the offensive line and the quarterback for the Gators. I'll take Tennessee over Florida.
For me, Tennessee, they haven't impressed me much so far. And I think that if Florida can figure out their quarterback situation, they've got a great shot at winning the game. I know Callaway is still suspended, but I think the Gators can pull this one out.
Yeah, that's wide receiver Antonio Callaway, who's the number 1 receiver for Florida. They'll also be without running back Jordan Scarlett for their second game due to suspension. I'm going to go with James on this one. I've got Tennessee in a low-scoring affair. Let's stay in the SEC, another fun matchup in Mississippi State when number 12 LSU comes to town. This is an exciting matchup, guys. 2 good offenses. Can Mississippi State pull off the upset?
LSU has a very strong history and a big lead in this matchup, but the last 2 games have been settled by 5 points or less and decided in the last 2 minutes each time. Nick Fitzgerald does damage with his arm and his legs. Threw for over 2,400 yards last season while rushing for 1,300 and scoring 16 touchdowns. The first time Fitzgerald faced LSU in Baton Rouge, the Tigers held him just 13 yards and sacked him 4 times. This is going to be an extremely close game, but Nick Fitzgerald has seen LSU before. He's in the comforts of home in Starkville, got a lot of experience. I think Mississippi State will end the 8-game losing streak at home to LSU.
I think it's going to be a very close game. Both teams, they're very physical, but I think LSU is overall the better team, so I've got the Tigers on the road.
Yeah, Mississippi State quarterback Nick Fitzgerald is really fun to watch. If you haven't had a chance to watch him play, he's a true dual threat quarterback. He can beat you with his arm, can beat you with his legs. He's a lot of fun to watch. Be sure to tune in to that one if you haven't had a chance to see him play. But for me, too much Darius Geis, too much of that LSU defense. I got the Tigers going into Starkville and getting a win. And if you're following a theme, not trying to have any SEC bias or anything, but let's stay in the SEC conference. Another big-time matchup. Kentucky goes on the road to Columbia to take on 2-0 South Carolina Gamecocks. Guys, neither of these teams are ranked. You could argue they're a little bit overlooked, but nonetheless, 2 unbeaten teams in the SEC squaring off. Who gets the win?
I thought South Carolina did a good job overcoming an early deficit against Missouri last week in the Battle of the Columbias, but Kentucky poses a bit of a different threat for the Gamecocks that they haven't yet seen this year. Kentucky relies heavily on the run game, and while South Carolina held Missouri to 178 rushing yards, Drew Lock has a big arm. They were able to shut down the Tigers' offense from a passing standpoint. Same thing against NC State. Wolfpack aren't much of a rushing team, so this will be a huge test for South Carolina. Both teams are tied in the turnover margin. I see this being a tight defensive game, but South Carolina has the slight edge over Kentucky at home. I'll take South Carolina getting the win over Kentucky.
Yeah, and it's a little bit tough of a decision, but I think Deebo Samuel keeps making big plays, and the Gamecocks outplay the Wildcats, and South Carolina pulls out the W.
Yeah, I got South Carolina too. Kentucky always seems to play pretty well against South Carolina, always gives them a good game, but I think the Gamecocks get the home victory. All right, now on to the big games of Saturday night. Game day is number 3. Clemson goes on the road to take on Lamar Jackson and 14th ranked Louisville. Clemson won 42-36 in this game last year, but that was at home. Who wins this time around in Louisville?
This will be the classic offense versus defense type of game. Lamar Jackson razzled and dazzled as he orchestrated a 28-point comeback last year in Death Valley. Jackson led the Cardinals to the 3-yard line on an attempted game-winning drive, but ran out of magic as Clemson stopped Jackson on 4th down. With both of these teams, they'd almost be a super team of their offenses and defenses if they were combined. What makes me question Louisville in the slightest is their struggle against Purdue in Week 1. Not to bash the Boilermakers, but they do not have the most electric offense. And the Louisville defense, 102nd in rushing defense, 110th in the passing defense. Being in Louisville will help the Cardinals, and even though I got burned by picking against Clemson last week, I'll take the upset pick again, Louisville over Clemson.
Yeah, like you mentioned, James, it's going to be a matchup of a stellar offense in Louisville and a stellar defense in Clemson. But I think even though Lamar Jackson, he's going to try and make a bunch of plays, I think he'll give Louisville a good enough offensive performance, but I don't think the Louisville defense has what it takes, even against a somewhat seemingly weak Clemson offense so far this season. I'm going to take Clemson in this one.
I'm going to take Louisville. I don't think anyone can stop or even contain Lamar Jackson. This Clemson defense certainly has the best shot at it if anyone can in the country. But Louisville's at home in front of their home crowd, and it's a questionable Clemson offense. And the more Lamar Jackson scores, and I think he will score a lot of points for this Louisville team, the more he does that, the more he forces this Clemson offense and Kelly Bryant, who hasn't looked all that good through 2 games, to keep up with Lamar Jackson and co. I don't know that Clemson's able to do that. I'm taking upset-minded Louisville Cardinals. And finally, a rematch of the 2006 National Championship game. It's a highly anticipated one. Texas comes to 4th-ranked USC. Guys, who wins?
As intriguing as this matchup is with its history, I think USC will get the best of the Longhorns the second time around, and 12 years later. Texas did not look great against Maryland, as impressive as it was last week when they blanked San Jose State 56-0. San Jose State, they're not known as a college football powerhouse by any means. Offensively, Texas shouldn't have a lot of questions. It looks like Shane Buechele will be available for Saturday, but I don't think Texas is too anxious to push him too hard yet since he's young, just a sophomore. Sam Ehlinger had a very good game against San Jose State, but USC is a much different matchup. Sam Darnold and Ronald Jones are one of the best passing-running combos in college football right now. USC will avenge their 2005 national championship loss and beat Texas in a Saturday night showdown at the Coliseum.
Yeah, like you said, rematch of the 26 Rose Bowl game. I don't think, though, it's going to be much of a contest. Sam Darnold's legit. The Trojans just have way too many tools, I think, for the Longhorns to handle. And so as much as I hate to say it, I've got USC in this one.
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. I'm not trying to take the flip side or anything like that, but yeah, USC, they're going to cruise. I don't think this will be much of a matchup at all. There's a lot of talk, like James said, USC getting revenge for 2006. That's kind of hyped this game up a lot. It won't be that close. USC is trending up with Sam Darnold, Ronald Jones on the offensive side. Amon Marshall leads that defense. They're unstoppable, and I don't think Texas poses that much of a threat to USC. I got the Trojans in a pretty easy victory. That's going to do it for us here on Friday Night Sports. For for James Flowers and Mitchell LaFave, I'm Ben On. Be sure to tune in to our next Friday night as we will recap the TCU SMU game as well as all the other games from college football in Week 3. We'll recap some NFL and maybe even get some baseball in there. Be sure to tune into all that. If you miss anything from tonight's show, you can find us on Facebook, Friday Night Sports, or on Twitter, Friday Night Sports, FRINIGHTSPORTS. Once again, for James Flowers and Mitchell LaFave, I'm Ben On. Good night, everyone.